This is a conversation with Carmen Wampler-Collins for the Kentucky Marriage Equality and Religious Liberty Oral History Project. We are in the studio room of Breckenridge Hall on Morehead State's campus, located in Rowan County, Kentucky. It is 2 o'clock on June 14th. My name is Dakota Barr. First of all, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to agree to meet with me today.
Sure, happy to be here.
I'd like to start with some biographical information, such as where you were born and where you grew up.
Well, I was actually born in Plymouth, Indiana, but only lived there a short time. My parents are both from Morehead, and so by the time I was 1, we had moved back, and I grew up in Morehead.
If you could just briefly touch on your childhood.
Sure. Like I said, I grew up primarily in Morehead. We left Morehead and Rowan County and lived in Elliott County for about 3 or 4 years, from the time I was 6 to 10. I did like 1st through 4th grade in Elliott County. I come from a relatively big family on both sides. My dad is one of 9, my mom's one of 6 kids, so I had a big extended family, cousins, aunts and uncles, and that was our basic social group growing up. So, my summers were spent with my cousins at each other's houses, that kind of thing.
So would you consider Morehead to be your home?
Yeah, it's my hometown for sure, yeah.
What about your religious upbringing or ideological background?
Interestingly, my parents were sort of the black sheeps in their family. They both came from traditional Baptist backgrounds. Both of my parents' mothers, went to church regularly and were pretty devout Christians. When I was a kid, we actually didn't go to church, and my parents were very liberal. My dad would have said he was a humanist, I think, and we were taught about the Bible and stories from the Bible, but always under the guise of this is what some people believe. So it was more, it wasn't presented as truth. We were allowed to go to church with our grandparents, but my parents didn't really believe in God and Jesus and so they sort of left it to us to determine, what we believed in and what our faith would be. They were pretty liberal for the area, definitely very, very liberal for coming from their families and their upbringing. I'm not sure what caused that or or why that happened, but that's the way it was. I actually remember feeling one of the things that made me different as a kid is that we didn't go to church. I really, really wished we had when I was young, because that's outside of family, that's where social groups in this area sort of had their base, was in church activities or Sunday school, and we didn't do any of that, So, but I was always very spiritual as a kid. I liked going to church, but I never took any of it as gospel, so to speak. My cousins would tell me, if you say the word, this and this word, if you say you don't believe in God, you're going to hell. So I would say it like to prove that the ground wasn't going to crack open. It was a sort of literal thing. But yeah, we were different in that way. But like I said, I liked going to church, and I never was a hardcore believer, but I guess I went through different periods of faith of what I believed in, and sometimes that was a more traditional belief, like my grandmother, and it sort of expanded into to be a little more open than that as I got older. The interesting thing was, my dad, when I was older, he had a fall, and he had some physical problems that caused him to go back to the church, and he ended up becoming a lay minister in one of the conservative Baptist churches in town. And while his beliefs were much more liberal, he felt like he was needed in that community that was lower income and that had a pretty staunch, radical conservative belief. So it was interesting to sort of see him go through that process over time.
Are you currently a member of a church?
No.
What do you do for a living?
I am a grant writer and fundraising consultant. I do consulting work for nonprofits.
I'd like to ask you how you first became involved in the marriage equality movement.
Sure. That's to think about that a little bit. I think, for years, Shannon and I had been involved in different parts of the movement. before it became specifically about marriage equality, she's from Northampton, Massachusetts, and we lived there when some of the first fairness ordinances were being passed and laws of that sort, non-discrimination laws were being passed, and worked in that area on those sort of efforts. And even in the progressive area where we were, it was heartbreaking at that time. We went through, Northampton was a very, very progressive town. The mayor was a lesbian, and the first fairness ordinance there was defeated. I mean, and it was heartbreaking, heart crushing. And then we were involved a little bit we moved to Asheville, North Carolina for just a short while, very short while, and we're involved there a little bit with some of the LGBTQ groups, working on different legislation. And then when we moved to Morehead, there really wasn't anything locally. We lived here for a few years when we first came back to Kentucky, but we were involved with the Lexington group. We participated in a lot of events when the constitutional amendment making marriage between one man and a woman was passed. We fought against that. So, I mean, in some ways, on and off, we've been involved for a long time, I guess. Not as hardcore as some people. I mean, it wasn't, I don't think it took up as much space in our lives until things happened in Rowan County. But we were part of a same-sex parenting group in Lexington. So we've always, sort of been involved. Yeah.
Would you consider yourself an activist on that matter?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
How did you first react when you heard the Supreme Court's decision that marriage equality was the law of the land?
It was really overwhelming. I mean, immediately I was just stunned. I think coming to that point, knowing it was going to happen, it was still unbelievable. Shannon and I, my partner, would have these conversations, and I'd say to her, I think, this year, by the summer, I think it's really going to be legal. And she would say, I don't think so. I can't see it really happening, that we're that close. And she's like, and even if it happens, it's not going to happen here in Kentucky. And so I think I was just numb at first when it actually happened, and then seeing that the governor in Kentucky issued a statement saying that marriage licenses were to be issued that day. I mean, that people were getting married the same day that it became legal was astounding. I mean, and then for the first 30 minutes I was just sort of numb, and then tears, I was just crying, and then I was on the phone and on social media with different friends and family. Unfortunately, not all of that. Within an hour probably, my cousin had written to me, just heartbroken that her sister had posted something nasty. She's a lesbian, and that her sister had posted some religious statement of, just because it's legal doesn't make it mean it's right, and just that we couldn't have, she didn't even get an hour to celebrate before having to already face that kind of stuff in our own family. So there was the good and the bad, but it was just, we really hadn't even talked about what we were going to do, Shannon and we had a commitment ceremony in 95. And that was our wedding. I mean, we never at that point talked about, maybe someday we'll be able to get legally married. I mean, we just acted as if we were, and really didn't think it would happen in our lifetimes. I mean, we really, really didn't until the last, year before it looked like it was going that way. We didn't expect to see it. So that was, and then just, a lot of joy, a lot of trying to get our heads around what does this even mean? What is this? How is it going to affect our family? Legally, what does it mean? What does it do for us financially? Was a big deal. Yeah, so that's how we first found out.
When did you choose to act upon the Supreme Court's decision?
Shortly after we heard the decision was legalized, my son Evan and Shannon were watching the news, and they're like, they're not issuing licenses in Rowan County. I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. I couldn't believe it. She had even jokingly said, well, they, probably won't happen in Morehead. I'm like, no, Morehead's pretty progressive comparatively, to other places in the state. I don't think it'll be a problem there. And I was just dumbfounded. That someone here where I grew up would stand up and say no to what was essentially law. And so I knew right away that we were going to be involved. I think, I was also blown away. I did not expect the community response to be so sudden and supportive of marriage equality. And, as soon as I saw that there was a movement, I was like, well, we're going to go up and protest, and I think it took us a day or two to be able to get here. But, it wasn't a question that we were going to go. And it was, it's, for me, it was something, it was immediate that this is a place that matters, that I could stand up, and that I needed to. I felt like a responsibility being from the area and also having young people in the area that are LGBTQ that I'm related to and that I love, who aren't able, to easily make a stand because of who their family is or, what their relationships are. It was something I knew I had to do. So we made the decision, and I think it took us a few days. I had a lot of angst about it, actually, right before we came, and because it's, I've been out for a really long time and have been active, but it's a very different thing to be standing in the place where you grew up, to holding a sign saying I'm gay, or that's going to let people think that you are, whether you are or not. Yeah.
Did you try to get a license?
We did. Yeah. We came up the first day we came to protest. We weren't sure what we were going to do, and there were, we kind of talked with some of the other couples that were there, and talked to people who were involved in the case that had been filed at that point, about how we could help. And the consensus was at that time, it would be, we didn't know because we weren't from the county whether it would make a difference or not, but my sister was with us, and she also really just wanted, she wanted us to do it. So we went in, and applied for a license the first day we came to protest. Yeah. And
you were denied a license?
We were denied a license. Yeah.
How did that feel?
It was infuriating. Really, really infuriating. And it, even though what's going to happen, and there are other people who have gone and asked, to have someone stand in front of you and tell you, quite frankly, that because of what they believe, they are not going to follow this law, and they don't think you deserve to have this license. It was heartbreaking. It made me more angry than anything, though. And when the first time we applied, I wanted her to make. We spoke to Kim Davis, and we insisted on speaking to her directly, and I wanted her to be crystal clear about why she was denying it, and for her to say it was based on her religious belief. And, she actually looked at us and said, I am not going to allow this. And it was infuriating. It was just, it defies reason. You think a reasonable human, like if they see you as a person, couldn't possibly do this thing. And she did.
Did the fact that this event took place in a setting you would call home have an effect on your viewpoint?
I think it definitely, yes. From 95, when Shannon and I first got married, you sort of learn to make you make your own life when you're not going to be able to have a legal marriage. So you can't make the assumption I can get married in my hometown. You can't, and so that had been fine. It was okay. We have a good life. I have friends and I have family that support me. And so maybe it wouldn't have mattered until someone told me I couldn't. And, this is the place where I grew up. It's the place where my family, still lives. It's the place where my nieces that I love dearly, still live. And to be told, you can't do this thing here. If I can't, then who, what right does anybody, it felt very wrong to me. Yeah.
So after you were denied your license, what was your immediate action? What steps did you take?
I think at that we called the ACLU because we wanted to let them know, that we were willing to do whatever they needed that would be helpful. They wanted to focus on cases that were just in Rowan County. And, we, at that point, were just committed to continuing, and we knew we were going to be a part of the protest movement in Morehead. We knew that we were going to continue to be a part of that fight. And honestly, it seems weird, but we kind of had to make the decision when we went and asked for the license, because we hadn't talked about yet when we were going to get married and if we were, and legally married, because we considered ourselves married, and it was more of a financial and legal thing than maybe a sentimental thing to us at that point. So we sort of talked about on the day that we protested, like, are we okay with making this political, And for us, it was more about the politics at that point than the personal. I mean, it felt right. It felt like the right thing to do. I mean, we weren't a young couple that this was their first wedding. It felt like we were in a place where we could do this. Yeah. So, I mean, we called the ACLU and we kept participating, but we hadn't decided yet. We weren't in a big hurry to get the licenses. So we were going to hang in there to do what we needed to do in Rowan County.
So after you were denied a license, you participated in the protests.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
We would, it was pretty heartening actually to see that as long as licenses were still denied, there were people from the community who were showing up. I mean, maybe just one or two a day, and some days there were bigger crowds, but my schedule is pretty flexible, so we were coming up probably like at least once a week just to hold signs and sit with people, stand with people, and it was great in that I met some really great people that I had never known, but I also reconnected with people that I had known. Mary Hargis, who's the trustee of RCRC, I have known since I was probably 4, and she was friends of my family, and to see those people out there it really meant a great deal. And I encouraged people to come out, so we got friends to come stand with us and to show up for that too. And I think it was for me it was really very powerful to be in the place where I grew up, and in a lot of ways never felt like I quite fit in. It was never a question that I was going to leave at some point, that I would, that I would have to go away to be able to survive. And so most of my activism hadn't been in, anywhere near Morehead. I mean, we were out here, but I wasn't actively involved in any type of movement here. So it was, there was a moment that was really surreal and sort of full circle for me when I was out holding signs and could look down the street and see where my grandmother lived, most of my life. And it's probably the most accepted or the most belonging I had ever, I felt like I was with a group of people that I belonged with where I'm from, which was a very unusual experience for me.
Were these the first protests you ever attended? Or?
No. I had, in other parts of the country we had done, and we had done some protesting for environmental stuff. We'd gone to D.C. for some marches and that kind of thing. Yeah. So.
Describe the environment at the protest. Did you feel safe? Or?
I did. But for me, I guess in being part of a same-sex couple and being out a long time ago, and we have kids, and I made the decision that I was going to be out. And so somewhere there you can't be completely safe. It doesn't matter what you do. And so you make the choice to live in fear or to not. And so I choose not to. And so I know there were some people who were real concerned about being out, but that for me, while I always know there's a chance of something happening, it wasn't a big concern. And overall, the protests here were not nearly as vicious as, and especially when it was just local people, in Morehead, it was pretty moderate. I mean, there were opposing views, but there was no violence. There were no threats of violence. There was no, I didn't feel, at least in those early days, I didn't feel unsafe.
Do you think the protest took a relatively positive stance or negative?
I think it took a positive stance. Yeah, I think overwhelmingly.
On both sides?
Yeah, on both sides. I mean, as much as you can, it's really hard for me to say that because, I strongly disagree with the other side. But they weren't, I mean, there were people walking over saying hello to people they knew on our side. It wasn't, don't get me wrong. I mean, there were definitely clashings of feelings, and there were some days when some negative stuff happened and people got angry. But there was never violence. There was never, that I saw, at least in the early days. As things progressed and groups came in from other places and things got more heated. By the time we went back to apply for a license, it was, there was some real fear and what could happen just because there were so many people involved.
How did you combat that negativity?
I think I have so much positivity. I mean, I think overwhelmingly for me, I was not unaware of the attitudes and opinions of those people on the other side, on the religious freedom or the, against same-sex marriage. I knew those people existed here, so whatever work I needed to do to deal with that, mostly I had already done. So for me, it was a positive experience because I was not as sure of the people who supported us. And so for me, it was always just this really positive thing that there were people who, many of whom were not gay, were not a part of the queer community, but were willing to spend their time coming out, standing up, saying this is wrong and we don't want to see it where we live. So I think that positivity overwhelmed most of the negativity. The only place that was really hard for me is that the whole thing opened up some issues with my family, my extended family, who, we had sort of made peace with. I knew they were religious. I knew they didn't believe in what, our lifestyle. But they accepted us. We were at family barbecues together, and we were, but to see them take sides, to take the other side and to actively work for, against legislation that would support me and my children, it really devastated me. It was, it made me rethink those relationships. Not that anyone said to me, we don't want you here, but I had to remove myself from some situations that I normally would have been in or family functions that I would have attended because I was too angry. It was too, I felt like I was being expected to give them more understanding than they were willing to give me. And I think it's probably a point in my life where that just isn't okay anymore. Yeah.
Did the viewpoints of your extended family members have an impact on your decision to act?
No, not really. Not really, no. Because fortunately, and I'm very fortunate, and I know this, they're not the people who are closest to me. They're extended family members, and that hurts, but everybody who's an active part of my daily life, my mom, my siblings, even a lot of people in my extended family, cousins, aunts, are very supportive. When we came back to apply for a license, I had aunts and cousins and their kids who came out specifically to be with us. So it didn't really affect my action at all. I did have to stop and pause to think about my mom, who is very personally supportive, but she's also a very private person. And so I tried to, when we knew we were going to come back and apply for a license and there'd be a lot of media around it, I thought I'd better give her a call just so she knows what was going on. And I couldn't reach her, but I talked to her afterward, and I'm like, I want you to know this happened. We showed the license, it has your name on it. And she thought I was worried about her disapproving in some way, and was very, she's like, I hope you know that I'm not ashamed of you or ashamed that you're my daughter. And I'm like, no, Mom, I just want to make sure your privacy is that I know where you stand, and I appreciate it. So we had that conversation, but that was really the only, opinion that really mattered to me.
What was your goal with the protests?
For me, it was really all about I think speaking up for people who maybe couldn't speak themselves, or speaking up for the teenager I was growing up here who didn't have a voice and couldn't have, at that point, taken that action. I think it's real different to be from this area and to understand what that means. But I don't have a lot to lose. I have stability, and I have family, and I have support, and I'm out. And I know that that is not true for everybody. And I felt like I wanted to add my voice as someone from the area. The other thing that bothered me about the conversation that happened during the protest is that a lot of people on the other side said, these aren't people from here. These people who are standing up are with the university, or they're from out of town, or they're not locals. Not that that doesn't mean Morehead isn't your home, but for those of us who have grown up here and who this is our hometown, well, first of all, a lot of us left because we had no choice. If we, in the rural, community, religious community, if you're going to be open and out, a lot of times it's better for you not to be here. And it made me angry to say, we are here. This is not just happening to strangers or from people that you don't know, or from people who didn't grow up here or don't know the people here. And there are more of us. There are certainly, I'm sure, a lot of same-sex couples who wouldn't come forward in this area because of, what the impact would be for them, and who didn't want the attention. And so I just felt like it was a place for me that I could say something, it was a place where I could do what was in front of me to help, and I did.
Would you regard your tactics at the protest effective?
I think that, for me, yeah. Depending on, for me, the importance of the protest was not necessarily to change action, but it was to show, to have a vocal part of this community be seen by the people who needed it. To know, for the gay kid who hasn't come out, who lives in a religious, a fundamentalist family, to know that there are people within the community who would be there for them and support them. I also think the tactics were effective in that, I know some of the couples applied before the protest started, but as things got more and more heated, I think it was incredibly helpful. I know it was for me to have a group of people to show support. It's a really difficult thing to do, no matter how out you are or how much of an activist you've been, to walk into that office and know you're going to stand up to homophobia. To know you're going to see. It's not something people want to do. It's if you, it's not fun. And so to have the support of people who are, there with you, and that was really great for me. So I think that was really effective. And I do think without having an active group of protesters, I'm not sure things would have changed so quickly. I'm not sure, I know the court system had to make the decisions that eventually led to licenses being issued, but I don't know if that would have happened as quickly or the way that it did without protesting. So yeah, I think it was effective.
Would you have done anything differently?
The only thing I can think of is maybe getting involved even sooner and being there more. That's really the only thing I can think of.
Do you believe that you made a difference by your involvement?
Yes. Yeah. I think, well, for one thing, I know, and it matters to me personally, I have a niece who is involved with a woman, and they're engaged to be married next year. She would never, ever have wanted to go through a protest, or that isn't who she is. The whole situation scared her. And I know right after she came up to me and was just like, thank you, so for that, on a very personal level, like, I know that it made a difference. And I think when Shannon and I came back after Kim Davis was in jail, and we were the first couple to apply after she was released. And it was a really tough decision to make, because it was scary at that point, for one thing. I mean, there was just a lot of media and a lot of protesting and a lot of groups going on, but we had been committed to doing what we could to help. And even the night before, I mean, we had let people know that we were going to do it, that we were willing to do it. But I was calling them like, if someone local comes forward, you don't have to save this for us. We're okay to. And it was, the night before was probably, it was the hardest night for me. It was a really sleepless night. And, I felt sick. Like, I can't believe I'm going to go do this thing in front of all these people, and it's so antagonizing. And, you sort of, I am from this area, this culture where you don't make waves. And, here I am, going to go make a big wave right now, and everybody's going to know. I wouldn't have been sorry if someone else had stepped up. But on the morning that we were supposed to come, I think I'd been focused on the political and on the battle politically and on what, but when I woke up that morning, it hit me, that after 20 years together, Shannon and I were going to get a license. And so that, it was like, all of a sudden, it was just about the joy of that, really. Even though it was sort of surreal, and you have like CNN, as soon as I realized like what this meant for us personally, it just became a very joyful thing. My aunt and my cousin and her daughter were there, and my sister came to be with us. And, to be able to walk in there and get a license in the place I grew up in, never thought it would happen. Really, never thought it would happen. And to have people who'd loved me all my life right there. And, as we were applying, my dad passed away in 2004, and Mary had known him, and she just whispered to me, your dad would be so proud of you. It was really, like, people talked about it who saw it, and were like, I'm really sorry you had to go through that. And there were protesters and there were chanters. But for me, personally, it was, it's probably one of the best days of my life. It was really meaningful in a personal way, outside of what the bigger picture of the political aspects of it were. And it's hard, sometimes you get caught up in that whole political thing, but on that day for me, it was really just about the being so loved and so supported in the midst of all of that. It's something that I would never ever in my life have expected.
So after the joy you received from signing the license, walk me through what you felt walking outside into the large crowd.
There was, you get kind of adrenalized. But really, the people from the Rowan County Rights Coalition were there with us, plus we had family around us, and then the press just created this whole circle. So we felt very safe. We felt very, we couldn't see much that was going on around us directly. And I was really happy, just really, really happy. I couldn't believe, we actually had a marriage license, and it was, and we felt very taken care of. There was a lot of press there, but there were a lot of people working behind the scenes to make that work and make sure we were taken care of, and that, we went where we needed to go, and that nobody was inappropriate or, so it was a whirlwind for sure, but I felt very joyful, and, from that morning, I just felt very calm. It was like this inner sort of calm, like I had worried about it the night before, what would I say, and, it just didn't, it just sort of happened flawlessly on that day. That's honestly, You
mentioned feeling safe because RCRC was there.
Yes.
Can you describe to me what that is?
Rowan County Rights Coalition, that's RCRC, it was sort of born out of the group of protesters who stood up over the Kim Davis when she started denying licenses. It was the group of people who showed up to protest, and who kept showing up and who sort of organized, helped walk people in as they went to the courthouse at that point, and who were there to support us. I mean, they were the people who called and were like, "We've got your back, and don't worry about this." And a group of local citizens, again, most of them not gay, not a part of the queer community, but just really unhappy with the fact that this injustice was happening in our community, and were willing to come out, and bodily put themselves between us and harm. That's really the truth of it, to make sure that justice was done, and to say this is not the kind of community we want.
And are you currently a member?
I am, yeah, I'm a trustee now.
What kind of activities are you guys doing there?
Well, we're doing, the mission is to stand up for disempowered people, to protect the civil rights of disempowered groups within this community. And we have a legislative education committee who stays on top of, what laws are being passed that affect civil rights, and helping, the citizens here engage in that process and having a voice and knowing what's going on in Frankfurt and further on. And then we have an inclusiveness committee that works on actively holding events or arranging things to help marginalized communities be more active with the rest of the community. So some of the things we're doing, we do an outreach to the local nursing home. People go there once every other week to play bingo and to read with people and that sort of thing. And a couple of people have worked really hard to get open caption movies shown at the movie cinemas, for those who are deaf or hard of hearing. And our biggest project right now is working on LGBT Pride Festival for Morehead, which will be the first festival of its kind in Eastern Kentucky, and to let the community come together and show their support in this local area. So that's most of what we have going on right now, but the overall mission is to respond to the civil rights of marginalized people in the community.
Do you think this organization is a necessary asset in Rowan County?
I think it's a fantastic asset. Yeah, I really do. I think it's a wonderful thing for the area. I think as we grow and change and add members, and I think it's something that can not only react when something happens, but can hopefully bring, one of the things we're looking to do is to bring educational programs and to help raise awareness and to help Rowan County be, a more inclusive community for everybody who's a part of it.
Do you think these events have brought Rowan County closer together or further apart?
That's a tough question. I think it's brought groups closer together. I think there's a progressive group of people who never knew each other before, and who maybe didn't have a voice and who wasn't organized, who is organizing to do that. And I think it's definitely probably brought, a conservative group of people together, around issues that they disagree with. Now, whether or not that's brought the community together as a whole, I don't know. And I honestly don't know what the answer to that is. How do you support the civil rights of everybody in a place where there are a lot of differences about how that should happen? So I don't know. I think it's brought some people closer together, definitely, but I'm sure it's created a lot of divisiveness too.
Growing up in a family with a religious background,
mm-hmm.
does that give you any kind of different perspective on this issue than somebody else?
Yeah, I think it's, I don't know. It's less easy for me sometimes to discount other people because I know the people on the other side. I know that they can be otherwise loving, good people. It baffles me, how you could, know and my family and lovingly interact with us and still want to be active you know, against a law that helps and protects us. Like, I don't understand it at all, regardless of what your religious beliefs are. I don't get it. So, but I do understand that it's not a simple solution, I think, and that it isn't black or white. It's not always good versus evil. And I think it's, you know, it's a complicated situation, and finding a solution, because even with the Rowan County Rights Coalition and progressive people, I mean, part of the people you're working for may be kids who are in families that are really conservative. So how do you bridge that gap? I'm not sure what the answer is, but I mean, I think it gives me a little more understanding and perspective than maybe it would someone outside the area. Like, my partner's from Massachusetts, and she just doesn't understand, you know, like how can you, like, but this is what people know. It's not that they're evil, but it's how they were raised, and it's a culture that's really important to people. You know, so yeah, I think it gives me a different perspective, sure.
In your eyes, did Kim Davis, the county clerk, best represent the cause of religious liberty?
I don't think so, no. I don't think what she was doing had anything to do with religious liberty. I don't think, you know, to me, religious liberty is having the right to worship as you want. Like, it's, you know, if someone were trying to keep you from practicing what you believe, to attend in the church of your choice, if you were arrested because of something you believe in, if your personal rights were violated based on your belief, if she weren't hired because of her religion, okay. But I don't think religion has a place in government. You know, when you're taking a position that says you have to serve all the people and you're going to follow the laws of the state and the nation, I don't think you have the right, because of your religious beliefs, to, you know, impact someone else's rights. So no, I don't think it had anything to do with religious liberty. That's my personal view.
Do you think that she deserved to be imprisoned?
Nobody wanted that to happen. I don't know anybody who, you know, who really wanted her to go to jail. They just wanted her to issue the licenses. I don't know, but if, you know, she was willfully and loudly, you know, breaking the law and continuing to do that and refusing to do otherwise. So yeah, I mean, she probably did. You know, the judge certainly made that decision. But, you know, like I said, I would not have wanted to see that. I would rather her have, you know, resigned or found a way to issue the licenses without going through that.
So would you call her punishment adequate?
No, because for me, she's still breaking the law, and she hasn't. I mean, licenses are being issued. She's refusing to sign them. So in a way, she gave herself an exception. And I know she is signing them for opposite-sex couples now. So, I mean, she's flagrantly, you know, using her beliefs to decide what she does and does not have to do. So, and she, I mean, there were several laws that she broke, you know, misdemeanors in Kentucky. She changed forms without permit, you know, and I don't think she should still have the position. I mean, that's the bottom line. So I think she's really gotten away with using her religion to discriminate against other people, and still has her job to show for it.
How did you feel when she was released from jail?
Curious more than anything. You know, I was just really curious to see what would happen next. You know, because at that point, you know, we didn't know. we didn't know what her take was going to be and what was going to happen next.
There was a large rally outside of the jail upon her release. Mm-hmm. What were your thoughts on that?
It's disheartening, I think. It's disheartening that so many people see her as a hero. You know, mostly I had to tune it out because, you know, it did make me really angry, and that she got so much attention for it, and there were so many people, you know, coming to her side, and what she did was really very hurtful to people. I mean, really, really very hurtful to people. And so to see that there were that many people who didn't get that or disregarded that or saw her as some kind of hero was really disheartening.
So while this issue was going on, there were many reactions from local elected officials, statewide, and even U.S. elected officials. Can you walk me through how you felt about these reactions?
You know, locally and at the state level, the reaction was, I mean, there just wasn't much of a reaction, honestly. I mean, there were some pat statements of, you know, this is wrong, but no action was taken and that was incredibly frustrating, you know, locally or at a state level. No one was willing to stand up and say, you know, what she's doing is wrong and we're going to pursue it. She's breaking the law. And, you know, no one really wanted to associate themselves with, you know, the same-sex marriage cause, because I think, you know, they felt it would hurt them politically. And so that was incredibly frustrating. You know, we got more support on a national level from other states than we did really in the state or here at home. And it continues to be frustrating, you know, to feel like, I think what we did had an impact on the community, and, you know, same-sex couples can get licenses now in the county, but it was disheartening to learn that you really don't have much political support here at home, especially.
How about the abundance of media coverage on this issue? Do you believe that this issue deserved that much coverage?
I think it did. I think while I would rather it have not been an issue, you know, while I would rather same-sex marriage had been made legal and it wasn't a problem anywhere, and so it became a non-issue, I think this issue, and I think it's probably not the end of the issue, you know, really the issue being people claiming religious liberties when they, you know, in a public workplace, and I think that's an issue that hasn't been decided yet, exactly how, you know, if people are allowed to do that and how that will be handled. I do think it deserved the attention. You know, I think if it hadn't been covered, you know, maybe other people would have been. I mean, you know, I hear that even in counties in Kentucky, there are places they're still not issuing marriage licenses, and that may well be because they don't have people willing to come forward and ask for them. They don't have the support that they need. But I feel like it's surreal to me that it happened here in Morehead, Kentucky, but that there was going to be, if some, you know, there needed to be a story about this, you know, that people could understand that just because this ruling was made by the Supreme Court, it doesn't mean everybody everywhere is going to have access to the same rights. And I think, you know, that needed to be covered. I'm not sure, you know, all the coverage was always great, or, you know, anything once it becomes something on a national level like that, whether some of the coverage is frivolous, I don't know. But, you know, I think it was a story that warranted attention, sure.
Why do you think Rowan County was the one that became the hot button topic?
I think it actually is because there are people here who are progressive, you know. I think there were people who were willing to make a stand. I think there are people here who are really willing to come forward and ask for licenses, knowing they were going to be denied. You know, and it's such a mix of a place where you do have, I mean, Morehead has always been known, especially with the university, to be sort of a haven for LGBTQ people. I mean, I can remember from the 70s, you know, knowing people who were gay at the university and knowing that people came here for that. And everything is relative, but in the eastern Kentucky, Morehead is sort of seen as one of the more liberal places in the area. But you still have this undercurrent for those of us who grew up here, or who from the local community of a really, there's a really staunch conservative sort of religious background to a lot of the place. And so I think it was in some ways perfect that those two forces just met. I mean, there was someone who was determined enough in her religious beliefs to stand up and say no, and there were people who were progressive enough and unafraid enough to stand up and challenge her. I mean, so you'd almost have to have, I think, that kind of environment to be the place where something like this could happen.
In regards to this event, would you call either side's efforts a victory or a failure?
Victory or a failure? I'm not sure. I feel like our side, the side that stood up for civil rights and for same-sex marriage, I feel that our largest victory is in coming together and creating a community who's going to continue to work for equality in the area. I do think, licenses are being issued. However that happened, and I mean, there's still a lot of that is unaddressed, and I think it's going to take years to play out in the courts. And I don't think either side got that definitively addressed because of this protest. But I do think, at least for progressive people, I think we at least have a voice, and we have, some organization and a way to make things different going forward. And I don't know for the other side, I don't know that they lost much. I mean, because they had politicians come in and make everything okay. Kim Davis was never, she was sent to jail, but hasn't been charged for any of the crimes that she committed, the misdemeanors that she committed while she was in office. So I don't know that they failed either, I don't know. Yeah.
How has this experience changed you?
I think it has made me far less likely to, not that I did before, but far less likely to change who I am to make other people comfortable. Even after being out for a number of years, you realize there are ways that you, especially people that you love or that are close to you, that you accommodate their belief system or their issues with your lifestyle. And I think it's made me far less willing to do that. It's made me much clearer on where people stand and how that impacts me and my family. I think it's made me more outspoken, for good or for bad, Yeah.
Regarding the debate over religious liberty and marriage equality, would you consider that to be over?
No, I don't. I don't think that's over by a long shot. I think it's something that's going to probably play out in the courts for the next few years. I think eventually there will, it will go to the Supreme Court, and there will be some kind of ruling that gives a more definitive answer to that. But I'd say we will see, maybe not just in the case of same-sex marriage, but in other places where public officials, feel like part of their job duties violate their religious liberty. I mean, a decision will have to be made, and I don't think that's been definitively done yet. Yeah.
More so than marriage equality, LGBT equality in general. Is this something that's going to continue to be fought over, or has marriage equality settled the issue?
Well, 50 people were blown away at an LGBTQ club this weekend, so I think we have a long way to go. It's And those of us in the community, I think we knew that. We already knew that. I mean, we come leaps and bounds, and you don't want to lose the celebration of that because things have changed. But the truth is, in most places in the world, people can lose their housing, their job. There's no laws against discrimination against LGBTQ people. Trans people. And trans people of color especially, are brutalized on a daily basis, and no one cares for the most part. I mean, no, the fight's definitely not over. I mean, we still have higher rates, insanely high rates of suicide within the community, not by a long shot. I mean, definitely life is better than it was 20 years ago even, but no, it'll continue to be a fight.
How will you continue to fight?
Well, part of that is, just showing up and being out every day. Like, I have 2 kids, and, I never hide who I am. And that's the biggest thing. It's all those times and places where you have to decide, you think you're out, but, you have a new doctor, you have a new school, you have new teachers, and you have to explain the whole thing over again. But I also find that on the personal level, just being out and not being afraid and getting to know people it's probably the thing that changes things more than. I mean, I've seen that in my personal life, within my family, with in-laws who never knew someone who was, lesbian or gay before, who suddenly, their whole world is turned upside down about it because they understand you as a person and not as some other they that they don't know. So there's that, and then I'm very involved with RCRC and hope to continue that work in Rowan County, and then I also work with an active arts group. I'm active in a lot of different groups and plan. I'll continue to be. So I'd like in the future to work more with kids. That's one of my biggest interests, is working with the LGBTQ queer youth community, and hoping, to help kids who don't have support in their families or in their lives. So.
Do you think life is going to get better for people of the LGBTQ community in the future?
I think overall it will. I think it's always 2 steps forward and 1 step back. I mean, I think, I hope so, and I do have a lot of faith in the next generation of the kids who are, 17, 18, into their early 20s, for whom, they've just grown up in a very different era with regard to sexuality and gender expression, and for a lot of them, this is a non-issue. I mean, it really, really is. And I think as we move forward, even in very conservative families, like, it's just their friends and they talk about it differently, the labels are different, and I think moving forward, that bodes very, very well. I think over time, hopefully it will become a non-issue. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would like to talk about?
I don't think so. That pretty well covered it.
Well, I'd like to, again, thank you for taking the time to meet with me.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for doing this. We're really excited that it's happening.
All right, well, you have a great day.
Thanks, you too.